It was a quiet morning, the kind where the sun had just started spilling its soft light across the streets, and the world felt slow and calm. She was sitting by the small kitchen window in her modest apartment, sipping tea, watching the steam rise and fade into the morning air. There was a gentle rhythm to her life, one she had grown used to over the years. Days often passed quietly, sometimes lonely, but she had learned to find comfort in small routines, the warmth of her tea, the hum of the city outside, and the familiar faces at the corner shop where she bought her groceries. She had never thought of herself as the kind of person who would make headlines or do something extraordinary. But life, she was beginning to understand, often had its own plans. Her phone buzzed on the table, breaking the calm. She looked at it, expecting another routine message or a notification. Instead, the screen displayed a number she didn't recognize. Hesitant, she answered, her voice cautious but polite. "Hello?" she said. "Is this you?" A calm, professional voice asked on the other end. "We're calling from the hospital. We need your help. It's urgent." She froze for a moment.
"Help? What?"
"What kind of help?" "There's a patient here in critical condition," the voice explained. "We've been trying to find someone with your blood type. Time is short. If you can come in, you could save a life." The words hit her like a sudden storm. Her blood type, a life? She had always known her blood type, just a small detail among so many others in her life. But she had never imagined it could be so important. The calm of the morning shattered, replaced with a rush of uncertainty. I don't know," she stammered. I've never done anything like this before." "You don't need experience," the voice assured her. "You just need to come. The doctors will handle everything else. Every minute matters." She hung up slowly, staring at the phone as if it might give her some kind of guidance if she just looked at it long enough. Her mind was racing. A life depended on her, and yet she barely knew anything about the person, the situation, or what she was about to face. She felt a pull deep inside, a strange sense of responsibility she couldn't explain. There was a small voice in her mind, quiet but firm. "Go. You have to go." The next moments were filled with a flurry of preparation. She didn't know what to bring or how long it would take. She grabbed her bag, slipped into her shoes, and left her apartment, the city waking up around her in soft golden light. Every step felt heavier than usual, her heart beating fast, a mixture of fear and determination coursing through her. As she walked to the car, she thought about her life, the quiet days, the small routines, the world she had grown comfortable in. And yet, in this unexpected moment, everything felt larger, sharper, more urgent. When she arrived at the hospital, the building loomed tall and sterile, its white walls and bright lights almost blinding compared to the gentle morning outside. Nurses and doctors moved quickly, a blur of motion, their faces calm but focused. She approached the reception, explaining who she was and why she had come. Almost immediately, someone guided her through the hallways to a small, quiet room. Sitting there waiting, she could hear the faint beeping of machines from nearby rooms, the distant voices of staff, and the soft rustle of paper and footsteps. She felt her hands grow clammy, her stomach twisting with nerves. She had never imagined herself in a place like this, standing on the edge of someone else's life and death. And yet, she felt strangely connected, as if she had been pulled into this moment for a reason she didn't yet understand. A nurse soon appeared, smiling gently. "Thank you for coming," she said. "We know this is unexpected, but you're doing something very important." She nodded, trying to smile back, but her heart was still racing. I just hope I can help," she whispered. "You will," the nurse assured her. "We'll take care of everything. You just need to be here." As she followed the nurse through the hospital corridors, she couldn't help but notice the life around her. Patients in rooms with worried faces, doctors moving with quiet urgency, and the soft hum of machines that seemed almost alive. The hospital was a world in itself, filled with stories she would never know, moments of struggle, hope, and fear all happening at the same time. And now she was about to become a part of one of those stories, a part she had never expected. She was led to a small room where she would be tested first, to confirm that she was a match. The process was quick, clinical, and professional, but the weight of the moment pressed on her. Her veins were traced, her blood drawn, and each drop seemed to carry more meaning than she had ever imagined. The nurse worked efficiently, speaking softly to keep her calm, and yet every moment stretched on, filled with the silent pulse of anticipation. While waiting for the results, Her mind wandered. She thought of family she had never met, of distant relatives she had only heard about in passing. She thought of her childhood, of the quiet moments when she had imagined doing something brave, something meaningful. And now, in this unexpected way, she realized that bravery could appear in the most ordinary person, in the most ordinary life. She didn't need to be extraordinary. She just needed to act. The results came back quickly. She was a perfect match. The nurse explained everything clearly. The transfusion process, the care that would be taken, the risks and the importance of her donation. She listened, absorbing the information, but her mind was only half there. Her thoughts were with the person whose life depended on her, someone she had never met, someone who might not live without her. She felt a strange mix of fear, awe, and something else, an unexplainable connection to a life she had never known. She took a deep breath. The fear was still there, but it was mingled with determination. She nodded to the nurse. "I'll do it," she said softly, her voice steadier than she felt. The process began, and as her blood was carefully collected, she sat quietly, thinking about how fragile life could be. Every heartbeat, every moment mattered. She thought about the people she loved, the people she had lost, the world she had come to know as safe and predictable. And she realized how quickly everything could change, how suddenly life could demand courage even from someone who thought they had none to give. Time seemed to slow. She focused on her breathing, on the rhythm of her own heart, on the warmth of the room and the gentle presence of the nurse by her side. She didn't know the story of the person she was helping. She didn't know the struggles, the pain, or the moments of joy they had experienced. But she felt a quiet certainty that life, in all its unpredictability, had placed her here for a reason. And in that moment she knew that doing nothing was not an option. As the morning moved toward noon, the donation continued. She felt the steady pull of responsibility, the invisible thread that connected her to a stranger, a life that depended entirely on her. She had never imagined herself in such a role, and yet she felt an unexpected sense of peace. In the midst of uncertainty, there was purpose. In the face of fear, there was action. And in the quiet moments of the hospital, she began to understand something profound. Sometimes courage is not about grand gestures or heroic acts. Sometimes courage is simply showing up when you are needed most, even if you don't fully understand why. By the time the procedure was finished, she felt exhausted, but strangely light. She had stepped into a world she had never known, faced the unknown, and done something that mattered in a way she could barely comprehend. She sat for a few moments, letting the experience settle in, feeling the connection to the life she had touched, the life she might never meet in person, and somewhere deep inside a spark of curiosity ignited, a sense that this moment was only the beginning of a story she could never have predicted. She left the room slowly, stepping back into the hospital's bright corridors, the world outside still moving, still alive. The city hummed around her, the sunlight warming her face, and she felt a strange combination of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had done something she never imagined she could, something ordinary people often overlook, the simple act of giving, of being present, of choosing to care when it mattered most. And in that quiet, unremarkable morning, she didn't yet know that her life, and the life she had touched, were connected in ways that would soon reveal themselves in the most extraordinary way. She only knew that she had answered a call, followed an instinct, and in doing so, had stepped into a moment that would change everything, without even realizing how deeply. The story of her life, and the life she had just begun to touch, had begun. After leaving the small room where her blood had been taken, she walked slowly down the hospital corridor, her mind still buzzing with the intensity of what had just happened. The hum of machines, the soft footsteps of nurses, and the distant beeping from patient rooms felt almost surreal now, like she had stepped into another world where life and death moved silently together. She had done something remarkable without even fully realizing it. For a brief moment she allowed herself to feel proud, though it was mixed with a quiet tension. She couldn't stop thinking about the person whose life she had touched, someone she had never met, someone who might not survive without her. She wandered into a small waiting area, sinking into a chair near the window. Sunlight streamed through the glass, warm on her face, and outside, the city carried on as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Children laughed in a distant playground, cars honked softly, and the everyday rhythm of life continued. She watched it all and felt a strange contrast between the ordinary world outside and the urgency of the life she had just stepped into. It was humbling and overwhelming at the same time. Minutes passed slowly. She stared at her hands, thinking about the blood that had left her body, flowing now into someone she had never met. She wondered about them. Were they young or old? Sick for a long time or suddenly struck by something unexpected? She had no answers, only the knowledge that she had a part in their survival. The thought gave her a strange mix of fear and calm. Fear, because she couldn't control what would happen next, and calm, because she had done what she could. A nurse returned and approached her with a warm smile. "The doctors want to speak with you," she said gently. "They'd like to explain a little more about the patient and the next steps." Her stomach tightened. She followed the nurse, her mind racing. What would they tell her? Would it be worse than she imagined, or better? As they walked through the hallways, she noticed the quiet efficiency of the hospital staff. Each step they took seemed purposeful, each movement calculated to save lives and bring comfort to those in need. She realized how many stories unfolded here every day, how many people faced unimaginable fear and hope, and how small acts like hers could become the turning point in someone's life. They reached a small office, and a doctor greeted her with a kind, reassuring smile. "Thank you for coming so quickly," he said. "We know this was unexpected, and we appreciate your courage." She nodded, unsure how to respond. Courage didn't feel like a word that described her, not really. She had simply answered a call, followed an instinct, and acted. But the doctor's words made her heart swell with a strange sense of pride. She realized that courage could exist in quiet, unassuming ways, in moments that seemed ordinary until they weren't. "We want to explain a little about the patient," the doctor continued. "The condition is critical. They've been struggling for some time, and the type of blood they need is very rare. Your donation came at exactly the right time." She listened closely, absorbing every word. She didn't need the details to understand the gravity of the situation. She could feel it in the tension of the room, in the way the doctor spoke, in the way the nurse quietly took notes. Every word reminded her of the invisible thread connecting her to a life she had never known. "Your blood will be used immediately," the doctor said. "We will monitor the patient closely. Thanks to you, they have a chance to survive." She nodded again, swallowing hard. A rush of emotions flooded her. Relief, anxiety, curiosity, and an unexplainable sense of connection. She realized that she was not just a donor. She was part of someone else's story now. A story she had stepped into without warning. A story that might change everything. After the doctor left, she stayed in the office for a few moments, letting the information settle in. She thought about her own life, the quiet routines she had grown accustomed to, and the sudden intrusion of something extraordinary. It was a reminder that life could be unpredictable, that moments of crisis often came without warning, and that courage sometimes meant showing up even when you didn't fully understand what you were doing. The nurse returned, offering her a glass of water. "You've done something incredible today," she said softly. "Sometimes people go their whole lives without ever having the chance to make such a difference. You did it without hesitation." Her fingers tightened around the glass. She wanted to feel proud, to bask in the glow of what she had done, but a small part of her worried about the patient. She had helped, yes, but she had no control over what happened next. The uncertainty was heavy, pressing on her chest in a way that made it hard to breathe. She sipped the water slowly, trying to calm her racing heart. As she sat there, she thought about her own family. She had grown up with stories of relatives she barely knew, people who had drifted in and out of her life. She had always wondered about the connections she had never experienced, the bonds that seemed just out of reach. Now, sitting in the quiet of the hospital office, she felt a strange awareness that life sometimes had hidden ways of connecting people, ways that could remain invisible until the exact moment they were needed. Her thoughts were interrupted by a quiet beep from the monitoring equipment outside the office. The sound was ordinary to anyone else, but to her it was a reminder of the fragile line between life and death. She realized how many people depended on others in ways they might never fully understand. The patient she had helped was one of them, and she had become part of that web of care and connection without even knowing it. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. She wandered the hospital quietly, sometimes stopping to watch doctors and nurses as they moved with quiet precision. She noticed the small acts of kindness, the nurse offering a comforting word, the orderly helping a patient walk down the hallway, the receptionist smiling at someone who looked scared and confused. She realized that these ordinary moments were not ordinary at all. They were the threads that held the lives of countless people together, often unnoticed, often unappreciated, but always vital. She found herself thinking more about the patient. Who were they? What had their life been like before this moment? She didn't have answers, only questions that swirled in her mind, heavy and insistent. And yet she felt a strange sense of hope. Somehow, somewhere, her actions had created a bridge between two lives that might have remained separate forever. By the afternoon, the doctors returned with updates. The patient was stable for now, responding to the transfusion. Relief washed over her, so intense that it left her breathless for a moment. She had done it. She had given life to someone in desperate need, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. Something she didn't yet understand. Something that waited just beyond the surface of her awareness. She left the hospital briefly, stepping outside into the late afternoon light. The city felt different now, quieter, more fragile. Every person she passed seemed like a story, every movement filled with hidden significance. She thought about her own life, about how ordinary it had felt until this moment and how quickly it had shifted into something extraordinary. She realized that life had a way of surprising people when they least expected it, of placing them in situations that demanded courage, empathy, and action. As she walked home, her mind continued to turn over the events of the day. She thought about the patient, about the nurses and doctors, about the invisible threads that connected them all. She felt an unfamiliar sense of responsibility. Not a heavy burden, but a quiet awareness that her actions mattered in ways she had never imagined. She thought about her own heart, about the blood that now flowed in someone else, carrying with it a part of her life, a part of her essence. When she reached her apartment, she sank into a chair by the window, staring out at the city as the sun began to set. The golden light cast long shadows across the streets, and the hum of the evening brought a strange comfort. She felt tired, but not in the usual way. This was the kind of fatigue that came from having faced something important, something real. She felt alive in a way she hadn't before, connected to the world and to a life she had saved without even knowing it. She thought about what the coming days might bring. Would she meet the patient? Would she ever know their story? The questions were endless, but she felt ready to face them. Something had shifted inside her, a quiet transformation that made the ordinary world seem richer, deeper, and more meaningful. She realized that acts of kindness, courage, and empathy were not always about recognition or reward. Sometimes they were about being present, about answering a call when it came, about stepping into a moment that mattered more than anything else in the world. That night, as she lay in bed, she replayed the day in her mind, the call, the walk to the hospital, the tests, the waiting, the knowledge that she had helped someone survive. She felt a mix of exhaustion, relief, and wonder, and somewhere deep inside a sense of anticipation began to grow. She didn't know what would come next, but she sensed that this day was only the beginning of a story, far larger than she had ever imagined, a story that would reach into the past, touch hidden connections, and change her life in ways she could not yet see. And as sleep finally claimed her, she dreamed of quiet hospital rooms, of lives intertwined in invisible ways, of courage that came softly without fanfare, and of a bond she had not yet understood, a bond that would soon reveal itself in the most unexpected and life-changing way. The next morning, she woke with a strange mix of anticipation and nervous energy. Sleep had brought only fragments of dreams, flashes of hospital rooms, machines beeping, and faces she did not recognize. But the feelings lingered. She couldn't shake the sense that the day ahead would matter in ways she could not yet imagine. The previous day's events had left a mark on her, subtle yet powerful, a reminder that life often moved in sudden, unplanned moments that demanded courage and presence. After a quick breakfast, she found herself walking toward the hospital again. She felt a quiet determination, a pull she could not explain, as if some invisible force was urging her to return. The city outside was waking slowly, people rushing to work, children walking to school, and the usual rhythm of everyday life continuing. Yet for her, everything felt heightened, sharper, more urgent. She had become a part of a story she didn't fully understand, and that story demanded attention. When she entered the hospital, she was greeted with familiar efficiency. The nurses nodded to her as she passed, recognizing her from the previous day, and there was a quiet warmth in their eyes, an acknowledgement of the small yet significant role she had played. She felt slightly out of place, but also strangely connected, aware of the web of lives that intersected here every day, each thread carrying stories of hope, struggle, and survival. She was led to a small observation room, where a doctor was waiting with a calm, reassuring presence. "Good to see you again," he said. "The patient has shown improvement overnight. Your donation is making a real difference." Hearing those words, a wave of relief washed over her. Relief, yes, but also a rising tide of emotion she hadn't expected. Care, concern, curiosity. She wanted to know everything about the person she had helped, to understand their story. But the reality was that much of it remained unknown. Still, knowing that her actions had tangible results was enough to steady her heart and sharpen her focus. The doctor explained that the patient had been in a critical state, and without her blood, their chances would have been much slimmer. She listened intently, absorbing each word, realizing more deeply the weight of what had happened. The connection she felt was growing stronger, an invisible bond stretching across time and space, linking her to a life that had once seemed distant and separate. While waiting for updates, she wandered the hospital hallways. She noticed things she hadn't before, the small acts of care that went unnoticed, the gentle reassurance offered to frightened patients, the way doctors and nurses moved with calm determination, even in moments of high pressure. These ordinary actions, she realized, were extraordinary when considered in the context of life and death. And in her own way, she had contributed to this quiet heroism. Hours passed slowly. She spent her time observing, reflecting, and occasionally speaking with the nurses, who offered gentle encouragement and small insights into the patient's progress. Every piece of information added to her growing sense of connection. She felt almost as if she were part of the patient's life now, a silent presence whose actions mattered profoundly. The realization was both humbling and empowering. By mid-afternoon, the doctors decided it was time to begin the main phase of treatment. The patient's condition was still critical, and the transfusion would play a crucial role in stabilizing them. She followed the nurse back to the treatment room, heart pounding, aware that every step mattered. She felt the weight of responsibility keenly, but also a sense of purpose that gave her courage. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of machines and the occasional rustle of medical supplies. The patient lay on the bed, unconscious, fragile, and vulnerable. She studied the scene carefully, noting the steady work of the nurses and the precise instructions of the doctors. It was a delicate balance, each movement and decision contributing to the patient's survival. As the transfusion began, she sat nearby, observing quietly. The sight of her blood entering another person's veins, her life mingling with theirs, was surreal. She felt an odd intimacy with someone she had never met, a connection that transcended words. Every heartbeat, every subtle shift in the patient's breathing felt magnified, as though time itself had slowed to emphasize the importance of this moment. She reflected on her own life, on the quiet mornings and ordinary routines that had once defined her existence. And now she realized her life had intersected with another in a profound, irreversible way. The thought was both thrilling and humbling. She had stepped into someone else's story without planning to, without fully understanding the consequences, and yet she had acted with instinctive courage. The hours dragged on, each one stretching longer than the last. She spoke little, not because she didn't want to, but because words seemed insufficient. Instead, she focused on the quiet rhythms of the room, the soft beeping of monitors, the whispered instructions of nurses, the slow rise and fall of the patient's chest. Every sound, every movement felt heightened with significance, a reminder of the fragile balance between life and death. At one point, the nurse beside her whispered reassurance. "You're doing more than you realize," she said softly. Sometimes the presence of someone who cares, someone who believes in the life of another, can make all the difference. Her hands clenched in her lap. She had never considered herself remarkable. Courage had always felt like a word reserved for others, for people who did grand things or faced obvious danger. But now she understood that courage could be quiet, invisible, and profoundly powerful. It could be as simple as showing up, as small as a donation of blood, and yet it could carry the weight of life itself. Time moved on. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the patient began to stabilize. Monitors showed steady progress, and the doctors exchanged quiet, satisfied glances. She felt a wave of relief, so intense that it left her breathless for a moment. She had done it. She had contributed to something extraordinary without fully knowing how, and the evidence of her actions was clear before her eyes. Even as relief settled over her, a new wave of curiosity emerged. Who was this person whose life she had touched? What had their life been like before this moment? She imagined stories, possibilities, and histories, each one stretching in her mind like threads connecting her to someone she had never known. The questions were endless, but they carried a strange joy as well. Life, she realized, was filled with connections that often went unnoticed until a single, pivotal moment. By evening, the patient's condition had improved enough for the doctors to step back and monitor from a distance. She remained in the room, watching quietly, feeling a sense of peace mingled with awe. She had been part of a story that mattered, a story where her actions had tangible consequences. And yet she sensed that this was only the beginning, that more revelations, more connections were waiting to unfold in ways she could not yet predict. She thought about the fragility of life, about how quickly everything could change. One day, she had been living her ordinary life, unaware of the threads that connected her to others. The next day, she had become part of a story that would forever alter her perception of courage, responsibility, and empathy. She realized that life's extraordinary moments often arrived without warning, disguised as ordinary events, waiting for someone willing to step forward. As the hospital lights dimmed for the evening, she stepped outside for a moment of fresh air. The city was quieting down, the streets glowing under the soft light of street lamps, and a cool breeze carried the faint sounds of life continuing around her. She felt a sense of connection not just to the patient, but to the world itself, the invisible threads that tied people together in ways unseen, the small acts that could carry enormous consequences, the silent courage that existed in everyday choices. Her thoughts returned to the patient. She wanted to know their story, to understand the life she had touched. She wondered what they would feel when they learned that a stranger had given a part of herself to save them. The thought filled her with a strange warmth, a quiet sense of fulfillment. Even in uncertainty, she had made a difference, and that alone felt profound. When she returned to her small apartment that evening, exhaustion settled in, but it was a deep, satisfying kind. She thought about the day, the transfusion, the waiting, the quiet moments of observation, and realized how much she had learned about herself. Courage was not loud. Heroism was not always visible. True impact could be gentle, quiet, and deeply human. She had discovered a strength she didn't know existed, a compassion that reached beyond her own life and touched another. As she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she felt a mixture of hope and anticipation. The patient was stable, yes, but the story was far from over. Something inside her told her that the journey had only just begun, that the connections she had formed, the lives she had touched, and the courage she had found would lead to revelations she could not yet imagine. Sleep eventually claimed her, but her mind lingered on the events of the day, the quiet triumphs, the moments of tension, the invisible threads linking her to a life she had saved without fully knowing who it was. And as she drifted into dreams, the world of the hospital, the patient, and the quiet acts of courage she had performed remained vivid. She sensed that tomorrow and the days that followed would reveal more of the story, more of the connections, more of the truth that had been hidden until this moment, and she was ready to face it step by step, with the same quiet courage that had brought her here in the first place. The following morning felt different from any other she had known. There was a sense of anticipation that clung to her as she walked toward the hospital, a quiet tension mingled with curiosity. Overnight, she had thought endlessly about the patient, the life she had touched, the fragile moments she had witnessed, and the invisible bond that seemed to stretch between them, even though they had never met. That bond, she sensed, was about to reveal something extraordinary, something that would change everything she thought she knew about herself and her past. When she arrived at the hospital, she noticed the usual rush of activity, but it felt different today. The nurses greeted her with knowing smiles, and there was a subtle energy in the air, a quiet buzz of something about to happen. She followed a nurse through the corridors, her heart beating faster than usual, a mixture of excitement and apprehension coursing through her. Something told her that the day would bring answers, that the story she had stepped into was moving toward a revelation she could never have predicted. She was led to a small office where a doctor waited, his expression serious but gentle. "Thank you for coming again," he said. "There's something important we need to discuss. It concerns the patient you helped save." Her stomach tightened. She had hoped to know more about the patient, to understand their life, but the doctor's words suggested that the information would go far beyond what she had imagined. She nodded silently, bracing herself. The doctor began carefully, explaining that as part of the hospital's procedures, they had conducted additional tests, tracing family connections and blood relationships to ensure everything was accurate and well documented. It was standard practice, he said. But as the conversation unfolded, she realized that the results were far from ordinary. "You might find this hard to believe," the doctor said softly, "but the patient you saved is biologically related to you. Very closely. In fact, this person shares your blood, your family line." Her mind froze. She blinked, certain she had misunderstood. What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The doctor continued carefully, explaining that their research into the patient's medical and family history had revealed connections that had been long unknown. Records had been lost, families separated over decades, and identities shifted in ways that obscured relationships. But the genetic evidence was clear. The patient she had saved was, in fact, her own relative, someone whose life had been entwined with hers from the start, even if circumstances had hidden the truth. For a moment, she could hardly breathe. The realization struck her with the force of a storm. She had spent her life thinking of herself as alone in many ways, disconnected from family she never really knew. And now here it was, undeniable and impossible to ignore. The life she had helped save had been connected to her own all along. Her blood had not only carried life, but had also carried a hidden truth she had never anticipated. Tears welled in her eyes as the weight of the revelation settled on her shoulders. She remembered the moments from the previous days, the transfusion, the waiting, the quiet observation of a fragile life. And suddenly everything shifted. Every heartbeat she had heard through the monitors, every breath the patient had taken was not just the life of a stranger. It was the life of someone who belonged to her, someone whose story was inseparable from her own. The nurse beside her placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I know this is a lot," she said softly. "It's overwhelming, but you should take time to process it. You've done something extraordinary, and now you know just how deep that connection goes." She nodded slowly, unable to speak, feeling a mix of shock, disbelief, and profound emotion. Her mind replayed memories of her childhood, vague stories she had heard about family members she had never met, and pieces of her past that never quite made sense. Suddenly, all the missing pieces began to fall into place. Questions she had carried for years, the gaps in her family history, the unanswered mysteries were now answered in a single, life-changing moment. Over the next few hours, she was allowed to visit the patient. The person lay in bed, fragile but stable, the machines surrounding them no longer sounding urgent alarms but quiet, steady rhythms. She stood by the side, looking at a face that was both unfamiliar and deeply familiar in a way she could not explain. It was almost as if life itself had orchestrated this meeting, bringing them together at the exact moment they needed each other. She reached out, lightly touching the patient's hand. The warmth of their skin, the subtle pulse beneath her fingers carried a strange sense of reassurance. Tears streamed down her face as emotions she had long suppressed, longing, loss, hope surged to the surface. She realized that the connection they shared was not just biological. It was emotional, spiritual, something deeper than she had ever experienced before. The nurses and doctors left them alone for a while, understanding the gravity of the moment. She sat quietly, holding the patient's hand, feeling the rise and fall of their breathing and thinking about the journey that had brought them together. She had walked into the hospital as a stranger, guided only by instinct and compassion, and had unknowingly stepped into her own family history. The irony was almost overwhelming, but it carried a profound beauty that left her breathless. She spent hours by the patient's side, talking quietly, telling them about her life, asking questions and imagining what their life must have been like. Even though they could not respond fully yet, there was a silent communication, a recognition that transcended words. It was as if both of them instinctively understood that their connection was more than coincidence, more than chance. It was destiny, quietly waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The doctors came back later in the day, offering updates on the patient's condition. They were improving steadily, the transfusion having done its job, and now recovery would be slow but certain. She listened carefully, absorbing every word, feeling a mixture of relief and gratitude. Her actions had saved a life, yes, but that life was hers in ways she could never have anticipated. The knowledge was overwhelming, but it also brought clarity, a sense of purpose she had never felt before. As evening approached, she stepped outside the hospital for a moment of fresh air. The city was quieting, the streets bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. She breathed deeply, letting the cool air fill her lungs, and tried to make sense of everything she had learned. Life had a strange way of revealing truths at the most unexpected times. She had come to the hospital thinking she was helping a stranger, only to discover that she had been helping someone who was an inseparable part of her own story. She thought about the days that had led to this moment, the call she had received, the nervous walk to the hospital, the hours spent waiting, watching, and hoping. Every step had mattered, every decision had carried weight, and now she understood why. It wasn't just about saving a life. It was about reconnecting with a family she had never fully known, about discovering bonds that had been hidden but were no less real, and about realizing that courage and compassion could bring miracles beyond imagination. Back inside the hospital, she returned to the patient's side, holding their hand, feeling the warmth and life coursing through her touch. She spoke softly, sharing pieces of her life, asking gentle questions and imagining the moments they could one day share. She felt a quiet determination to be there for them, to support them as they recovered, and to build the connection that destiny had finally revealed. The room, once filled with clinical detachment, now seemed alive with possibility, hope, and the promise of new beginnings. Throughout the night, she stayed close, watching over the patient, feeling a protective and tender care that went far beyond duty. She realized that life often worked in mysterious ways, that the connections we seek or do not even know exist can appear when they are needed most. The person she had saved was not just a stranger. They were a reflection of her past, a continuation of her family story, and a living reminder that love, courage, and compassion could reach across time and distance to reunite what had once been lost. As she finally rested for a few hours in the small chair by the patient's bed, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had begun the day thinking she was merely performing a good deed. By the end, she had discovered a truth that would change her life forever. She had saved a life, yes, but in doing so, she had found a connection to her own blood, her own family, and a bond that would shape her future in ways she could never have predicted. And as she closed her eyes, exhausted but content, she knew that tomorrow would bring new steps, recovery, conversations, and the slow unfolding of a relationship that had been hidden for too long. The revelation of the day had not just saved a life, it had healed something inside her as well, something she hadn't realized was broken. And it had given her a sense of purpose, belonging, and hope that would stay with her forever. The days that followed were filled with small, quiet moments that carried a weight far greater than she could have imagined. The patient continued to recover steadily, their strength returning little by little. Every day brought new milestones, an easier breath, a stronger pulse, a faint smile, and with each step forward, she felt a growing sense of connection, an invisible thread weaving them together in ways that were deeper than blood alone. It was more than relief. It was recognition, a feeling that they had found each other in a life that had once seemed fractured and incomplete. She spent hours by the patient's side, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in silence. Words were not always necessary. Just being there offering warmth and presence was enough. She noticed little things, the way the patient's eyes brightened when she entered the room, the subtle tension that eased when her hand rested gently on theirs, the quiet comfort of a familiar presence in a world that had been unpredictable and frightening. Every moment reinforced the truth she had begun to understand. Life's connections were often hidden, but when revealed, they were undeniable. The hospital staff observed the bond with quiet smiles. Nurses would glance over and see her leaning close, sharing small words of encouragement, brushing a lock of hair back from the patient's forehead, or holding their hand through the long hours of recovery. Doctors noted the calm confidence she brought, the gentle care that seemed to strengthen the patient more than medicine alone. She had become more than a donor. She had become a presence of healing, of reassurance, of love. During one afternoon, she sat beside the patient, watching them drift in and out of sleep. Memories of the previous days flooded her mind. The urgent phone call, the nervous walk to the hospital, the transfusion, the slow passage of hours filled with hope and fear. She realized that in each step, each choice, she had been drawn to this very moment, guided by forces she could not explain. And now she understood the deeper meaning. She had been saving not just a life, but a connection that had been missing for far too long. Slowly, tentative conversations began. The patient, weak at first, started to speak, sharing fragments of their life, stories of hardship, moments of fear, experiences that had shaped them. She listened carefully, her heart full, understanding that each word carried not just history, but pieces of the person they had always been, separate from her, yet connected through something much larger. They laughed softly at small anecdotes, cried quietly at difficult memories, and slowly, the walls between them began to fall. She shared her own stories as well, the quiet, ordinary moments of her life that had once felt insignificant. She spoke of mornings spent alone with tea, of streets she walked daily, of small joys and disappointments. With each story, a bridge formed between them, a way to understand each other beyond the facts of family or blood. They began to recognize themselves in each other, reflecting a shared resilience and courage that had carried them both through struggles they hadn't fully acknowledged until now. As the days passed, the connection deepened. She found herself thinking about the patient even when she was away, imagining what they might need, what comforts could make recovery easier, what words could bring reassurance. She began to see them not just as a patient, not just as a relative, but as a person whose presence now mattered in ways she could not have predicted. Each day, the invisible threads of their bond grew stronger, weaving together a story that had been lost and was now being rediscovered. The hospital eventually allowed short walks outside, and she accompanied the patient slowly through the quiet courtyard. The sunlight felt warm on their faces, and the gentle breeze carried the smell of grass and flowers. She held their hand firmly, guiding them with care, feeling the steady pulse of life under her fingers. In these moments, she understood the power of presence, the strength of quiet companionship, and the importance of simply being there for someone who had been waiting for her all along. They began to ask questions about their shared history, about family members they had never met, about traditions that had been lost to time. She answered as honestly as she could, piecing together fragments of memories and stories, careful to respect the gaps that remained. The process was slow, delicate, but with each revelation, the sense of belonging grew. They laughed at shared coincidences, marveled at the strange ways life had brought them together, and sometimes simply sat in silence, absorbing the enormity of the discovery. One evening, as the hospital lights dimmed and the quiet hum of machines filled the room, she sat beside the patient, reflecting on how far they had both come. The fear and uncertainty that had once dominated her thoughts seemed distant now, replaced by a quiet gratitude and understanding. She realized that this experience had transformed her, not in ways that were visible, but in ways that reached deep into her heart. She had learned that courage was not always about grand gestures, that love could be quiet and steadfast, and that life had a way of bringing people together exactly when they were meant to meet. The patient's recovery continued steadily. Each day they grew stronger, more aware, and more eager to engage with the world around them. She celebrated each small victory, the ability to walk without support, a full night of restful sleep, the return of appetite and strength. And with each step she felt her own life shift as well. The bond they shared, once hidden and unrecognized, now shaped her days with purpose and meaning she had never known. As the weeks went by, conversations grew deeper, exploring not just their shared history but hopes for the future. They spoke of dreams once deferred, of possibilities that now seemed within reach, and of the strength they could find in each other. She realized that the connection they had discovered was not simply about blood or biology. It was about empathy, trust, care, and the quiet courage to open one's heart when life demanded it most. Eventually, the hospital prepared for the patient to leave. The day of discharge arrived, and she accompanied them to the entrance, carrying a mixture of relief, pride, and a touch of apprehension. Outside, the city felt brighter, warmer, filled with promise. They paused for a moment, looking at each other, acknowledging the journey they had shared and the life that awaited beyond the hospital walls. It was a moment of quiet triumph, a celebration of survival, connection, and the unseen threads that had brought them together. As they stepped into the sunlight, she felt a profound sense of closure and beginning all at once. The patient, once a stranger and now a family, was no longer defined by illness or separation but by the bond they had rediscovered. She understood fully and completely that life often had a way of testing patience, resilience, and courage, only to reward it with moments of extraordinary clarity and connection. In the weeks that followed, they settled into a routine, slowly building the relationship that had been missing for so long. They shared meals, talked late into the night, laughed and cried together, and explored the world anew with a sense of wonder and gratitude. The initial shock and disbelief gradually gave way to comfort, familiarity, and a deep sense of belonging. She found herself thinking less about the past as something lost and more as something rediscovered, a story that had waited patiently for the right moment to reveal itself. Through it all, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The call she had received, the nervous steps to the hospital, the transfusion, the long hours of waiting, the moments of fear and hope intertwined. She realized that every choice, every action had mattered, leading her to a revelation that reshaped her understanding of family, life, and love. Her courage, though quiet, had been a catalyst for a miracle she could never have foreseen. By the end of the month, the patient had fully recovered, and life outside the hospital began to reclaim its normal rhythm. Yet she felt changed in ways that would last forever. The quiet strength she had discovered within herself, the deep capacity for compassion, and the understanding that connection could transcend time and circumstance. All of it remained as a foundation for the life she now shared with her family. Sitting in her apartment one evening, she reflected on everything that had happened. The ordinary morning when her phone rang had led to extraordinary consequences. A simple decision to act, to care, and to be present had transformed not only the life of another but her own life as well. She felt gratitude for the unseen threads that had guided her, for the courage she had discovered, and for the bond she had reclaimed. The story she had stepped into, one of urgency, uncertainty, and quiet heroism, had evolved into a tale of love, connection, and family rediscovered. She realized that life's miracles were often hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone willing to notice, willing to act, and willing to believe in the power of small, meaningful choices. And as she drifted to sleep that night, she felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for years. She had saved a life she didn't know was her own blood, discovered a family she had never truly known, and learned that courage, compassion, and connection could reshape the world in ways no one could predict. Her journey, which had begun with a single phone call, had led to a transformation she would carry forever, a story of life, love, and the extraordinary bonds that tie us together, even when we cannot see them.